So I'm going to finish my reading and analysis of Tom Walker, The Devil and Tom Walker. I am reading pages 7, 8, and 9 at this time. Thus Tom was the universal friend of the needy and acted like a friend in need. That is to say, he always exacted good pay and good security. In proportion to the distress of the applicant was the hardness of his terms. He accumulated bonds and mortgages, gradually squeezed his customers closer and closer, and sent them in length, dry as a sponge from his door. In this way he made money hand over hand, became a rich and mighty man, and exalted his cocked hat upon change. He built himself, as usual, a vast house out of ostentation, but left the greater part of it unfinished and unfurnished, out of parsimony. He even set up a carriage in the fullness of his vainglory, though he nearly starved the horses which drew it, and as the ungreased wheels groaned and screeched on the axle trees, you would have thought you heard the souls of the poor debtors he was squeezing. One of the questions on your exit ticket, I know for a fact, has to deal with this house, the furniture, and the carriage and the horses. Even though Tom is stingy and greedy, at the beginning of the text, he has no money, he's poor, and he's selfish. Here we are nearing the end of the text, and he has a lot of money, but he's not changed. He's still stingy. He has this big old house, didn't finish it, didn't put furniture in it, because he's stingy. He doesn't want to spend money on that. He has this big old carriage, but he starves the horses. He keeps the carriage in disrepair. The wheels squeak. He doesn't even oil them because, again, he's stingy. So he is what we call a character that does not change over the course of a text is a static or a flat character, okay? They're characters that do not change, static or flat, okay? As Tom waxed old, however, he grew thoughtful. Having secured the good things of this world, he began to feel anxious about those of the next. He thought with regret on the bargain he had made with his black friend and set his wits to work to cheat him out of the conditions. He became, therefore, all of a sudden, a violent churchgoer. He prayed loudly and strenuously, as if heaven were to be taken by force of lungs. Indeed, one might always tell when he had sinned most during the week by the clamor of his Sunday devotion. The quiet Christians, who had been modestly and steadfastly traveling Zionward, were struck with self-reproach at seeing themselves so suddenly outstripped in their career by this new-made convert. Tom was as rigid and religious as in money matters. He was a stern supervisor and censurer of his neighbors, and seemed to think that every sin entered up on their account became a credit on his own side of the page. He even talked of the expediency of reviving the persecution of Quakers and Anabaptists. In a word, Tom's zeal became as notorious as his riches. Still, in spite of all this strenuous attention to forms, Tom had a lurking dread that the devil, after all, would have his due, that he might not be taken unawares. Therefore, it is said he always carried a small Bible in his coat pocket. He also had a great folio Bible on his counting-house desk, and would frequently be found reading it when people called on business. On such occasions, he would lay his green spectacles in his book to mark the place while he turned around to drive some usurious bargain. Couple things out of that. One of the overwhelming themes in American literature is regret. So Tom regrets selling his soul as he's getting older, and he's like, uh-oh, I'm about to die. Dang, I sold my soul. I'm going to hell. As he's thinking that, he's thinking, I need to find a way out of this. And so he decides to go to church. This shows a couple things, not just the theme of regret, but this also shows how big Tom's ego is. His ego is so large, he thinks he can outsmart the devil. Okay? So that's that. I think both of those are on your exit ticket. All right. Some say that Tom grew a little crack-brained in his old days, and that fancying his end approaching, he had his horse newly shod, saddled, and bridled, and buried with his feet uppermost, because he supposed that at the last day the world would be turned upside down, in which case he should find his horse standing ready for mounting, and he was determined at the worst to give his old friend a run for it. This, however, is probably a mere old wives' fable. If he really did take such a precaution, it was totally superfluous. At least so says the authentic old legend, which closes his story in the following manner. One hot summer, in the dog days, just as terrible black thunder gusts were coming up, Tom sat in his counting house in his white linen cap and India silk morning gown. He was on the point of foreclosing a mortgage, by which he would complete the ruin of an unlucky land speculator for whom he had professed the greatest friendship. The poor land jobber begged him to grant a few months' indulgence. Tom had grown testy and irritated and refused another day. My family will be ruined and brought upon the parish, said the land jobber. Charity begins at home, replied Tom. I must take care of myself in these hard times. You have made so much money out of me, said the speculator. Tom lost his patience and his piety. The devil take me, he said, if I've made a farthing. One of the things I want you to understand is that conversation. Tom has gotten old, and so he's there, and he's about to ruin somebody and ask for all of his money that he's owed. And this guy has no money left. He's been paying and paying and paying and paying the interest, and he could just never get out of debt. And Tom is about to take his house. And so the man says, my family will be ruined and brought upon the parish. That means we'll have to go to the church for help. And Tom says, I have to take care of myself in these hard times. Knowing that Tom has plenty of money, the guy says, you've made a lot of money. And Tom says, the devil take me if I've made 1 cent. That's what a farthing is. So, just so you understand that, just then there were 3 loud knocks at the street door. He stepped out to see who was there. A black man was holding a black horse, which neighed and stamped with impatience. Tom, you're come for, said the black fellow gruffly. Tom shrunk back, but too late. He had left his little Bible at the bottom of his coat pocket and his big Bible on the desk buried under the mortgage he was about to foreclose. Never was sinner taken more unawares. The black man whisked him like a child into the saddle, gave the horse the lash, and away he galloped, with Tom on his back in the midst of the thunderstorm. The clerks stuck their pins behind their ears and stared after him from the windows. Away went Tom Walker, dashing down the streets, his white cap bobbing up and down, his morning gown fluttering in the wind, and his steed striking fire out of the pavement at every bound. When the clerks turned to look for the black man, he had disappeared. One of the questions on your exit ticket says, what can you assume? Tom had a tree in that forest with his name on it. Okay? Remember back earlier in the story, every rich man in the village had their name on a tree. So one can assume that Tom later got his name on a tree once he became wealthy. And the devil chopped it down, and now Tom is gone. Tom Walker never returned to foreclose the mortgage. A countryman who lived on the border of the swamp reported that in the height of the thunder gust, he had heard a great clattering of hoofs and a howling along the road, and running to the window caught sight of a figure such as I have described on a horse that galloped like mad across the fields, over the hills, and down into the black hemlock swamp toward the old Indian fort, and that shortly after a thunderbolt falling in that direction seemed to set the whole forest in a blaze. The good people of Boston shook their heads and shrugged their shoulders, but had become so much accustomed to witches and goblins and tricks of the devil in all kinds of shapes from the first settlement of the colony that they were not so much horror-struck as might have been expected. Trustees were appointed to take charge of Tom's effects. There was nothing, however, to administer upon. When searching his coffers, all his bonds and mortgages were found reduced to cinders. In place of gold and silver, his iron chest was filled with chips and shavings. 2 skeletons lay in his stable instead of his half-starved horses, and the very next day his great house took fire and was burned to the ground. Such was the end of Tom Walker and his ill-gotten wealth. Let all griping money brokers lay this story to heart. The truth of it is not to be doubted. The very hole under the oak trees whence he had dug Kidd's money is to be seen to this day, and the neighboring swamp and old Indian fort are often haunted in stormy nights by a figure on horseback in morning gown and white cap, which is doubtless the troubled spirit of the usurer. In fact, The story has resolved itself into a proverb and is the origin of that popular saying, so prevalent throughout New England, of the devil and Tom Walker. Okay, so we are finished that story. And if you have any questions, feel free to hit me on Remind. All right, but you have questions that go with the story, and I would like them by Thursday. We're going to start our next story, The Minister's Black Veil. I'm going to shorten it, so if you do see it online, there is a long version, but I am going to shorten it, okay? That's it.